Welcome to Mystery Wire with George Knapp. This podcast is dedicated to reports on Area 51, UFOs, military technology, paranormal, mysteries, and just great news stories. You found your place for interviews and special investigations into a diverse universe of strange, unknown, and unsettling subjects. Welcome to Mystery Wire.
Welcome, everybody, to podcast number 2. We are rolling here with George Knapp, Matt Adams. I'm Ron Futrell. We are ready for edition number 2 of Mystery Wire, the podcast version, and we've got some fun for you here. Bob Stoldal, we're going to be talking to him, former news director here at Channel 8 years ago when the Bob Lazar stuff first came out. We're going to jump deep into that, and you'll have a chance to give him a further intro than that, but I wanted to let people know what we were doing. Also, Mystery Wire, George, so far, it's been out for about a week now. What have you heard? What do you know? What have you found out? What are people saying?
Well, the feedback has been almost universally positive. We kind of had a soft opening. We've announced it here on Channel 8, and we've issued some releases on social media, Facebook and Twitter and such. But we have much grander plans in the future to have a much broader audience. So far, it's sort of traveled through the UFO world, kind of like the coconut telegraph. Somebody tells somebody else, or a phone tree, and people are eating it up. We have some internal statistics about how much time people are spending on the site. Obviously, they like what they see because some of them are getting on there and staying for days at a time. There's a lot of material still to be digested, I think, by anyone who spent any time on it at all. And there's so much more stuff that we have in the works that we're going to be putting on there, both from archives and new material that we've shot, new interviews, new investigations, a lot of cool stuff. We had an interview with John Fogerty. Ron, you and I and Matt went over, talked to John Fogerty of Creedence Clearwater, a great singer-songwriter, because he's got zombies and aliens and voodoo and hoodoo and all kinds of things like that, premonitions in his songs. So we figured there must be some kind of a connection. He's been on Coast to Coast AM a couple of times, so we went over and interviewed him. I mean, that's pretty cool, right? Yeah.
No, he was more excited to see you. I know you were excited to see him, okay? But Matt, you were there as well. I think John Fogerty was more excited to see George than the other way around.
Yeah, I was kicking myself for not rolling on this and not being ready for it. When he realized it was George, he starts going into the Coast to Coast intro. And he's doing it just by heart. And just George was dropped on him, and now he's doing the Coast to Coast intro. It was great.
He kind of gave me a look for a second, and he's trying to, all right, I know that name from somewhere. And I said, well, I'm a TV guy at daytime, and I do a radio show called Coast to Coast. He goes, Scirocco, the Scirocco blowing in across the desert. And he said, you're the guy that talks about putting on the bunny slippers. And that was pretty funny.
And then he gave you, let me give you a hug. And then he said, like he couldn't stop himself. This is John Fogerty. This is Creedence Clearwater Revival. This is, all the hits, all the songs.
A legend.
A legend. You don't get a bigger rock star than him. And he said, let me give you a hug. And then there were times especially at the start of the interview, because I've watched some of it on tape, where he's asking you more questions, and when we were tight on time, we wanted to get into you asking him questions, but he was asking you questions. Skinwalker Ranch, Coast to Coast, the radio show, your voice. He couldn't get over your voice. He's going, I'm hearing that voice that I heard in my head at night. Then here he is, right here in front of me.
Yeah, that was a surreal moment, and we've agreed to continue the conversation at some other point. I hope that happens. But I'd always heard that he listens to the program on a regular basis. I wasn't sure if it was true or not. Sure enough, it's true. He gobbles that stuff up. He has a real interest in the topics that we cover there and that we cover here on Mystery Wire. So I'm sending him links. I'm hoping he's going to be one of our viewers and one of our consumers on the website as well.
And we'll have him here on the website. We'll have his interviews will be on Mystery Wire, the interview you did with him, and we'll have it on the podcast as well.
Yep.
But we're now on, by the way, on all the fine places where podcasts are given away for free. we are there now, and thank you, Apple Podcasts. We're now up, no longer iTunes, I think. It's Apple Podcasts. But we're there, Google Play, iHeartRadio, Spreaker, the other folks that all do podcasts. So spread the word. Let people know about this. Let them know about Mystery Wire. Go to the social media, and they're easy to find, Mystery Wire. Go to our social media. We want people to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all of the places that you know, because we put out stuff on a regular basis. The YouTube page is doing very well. Subscribers on that, we want to get more subscribers on that. So I'm making a little bit of a pitch here, George, to go sign up for the social media stuff, because that does make a difference, and it helps us keep you informed, basically, on what we're doing.
I think the only negative feedback we've had is from people in Europe, that they can't access the website. There are legal restrictions. Believe me, we wish that everybody in the world could see this thing, but there are some legal restrictions that we have to deal with. I don't completely understand them, but we have a legal team that's working on it. We're going to try to work this out where people in Europe who want to see this stuff on the website will be able to see it in the near future.
And we'd like to thank Mark Allen with AboveTopSecret.com. He kind of released this to his readers. He has a very large audience, and they kind of gave us the quick sneak peek preview of what our audience is how they're gonna react to the website.
Yeah, ATS. This is right in their wheelhouse. So we appreciate those folks tuning in.
And we can track where people are finding us from, and a lot of people are finding us from Above Top Secret. So thank you. Yes, once again, I'll second that, because that's been great. But it's been interesting to see the responses too, and I've gone through and I've responded to a lot of the comments on Facebook that we're getting from people, and it is, generally speaking, it is, wow, thank you. We're glad to see this stuff, that it lives to be seen another day by some people around the world, and they want more of it. It's sort of an insatiable appetite that people have for this journalistically vetted material, not crazy stuff, journalistically vetted material about the supernatural and paranormal.
Well, we kicked it off with UFOs, The Best Evidence, the 30th anniversary of that series that sort of got KLAS and me and Matt and all of us involved in the UFO topic. By the time that we're airing this, that series is all posted up on the website, all the parts. And it covered UFOs basically from soup to nuts, but it was just the beginning for us. And in addition to that multi-part series, we've got these long-form interviews, Tom DeLonge, Lou Elizondo, unedited. We break them up into pieces, but we're not cutting anything out, which is not a normal thing for news organizations to do. We guard that footage with our lives, and nobody ever sees what is not sliced into an on-air package. But that's what's up on the site.
Well, to get to the genesis of all this, how did it all get started? I mean, we know how it all started, video-wise, the stories we've seen, but behind the scenes, how did it all get started?
Well, I think generally we get either the credit for or blame for putting Area 51 on the map, that series that started 30 years ago this month. And people think it's because of the allegations made by Bob Lazar, the wild claims. Actually, it's another Bob that really started the ball rolling, Bob Stoldal. Robert Stoldal, in my mind, is the most important Nevada journalist since Mark Twain. He was a news director at Channel 8 for about 30 years. He set the standard. He was the gold standard. He was the example for all the other news organizations in town, not only broadcast, but print as well. We led the way. He pioneered cameras in the courtroom and a million other things. We did the first live broadcasts. He set the mark pretty high. When I was first hired here in 1981, Bob Stoldal was already on the Area 51 story. He'd been collecting bits and pieces of information. He had some run-ins with some intelligence agencies because of the reporting that he and Ned Day did. So I thought, if we're starting out looking back at the beginning of KLAS coverage of Area 51 and the UFO topic, we had to talk to Bob. So we did this interview with him a little bit ago, and he helped sort of trace the genesis of where this all began.
And this was around the Bob Lazar. Well, I'll get you the reaction that he had to the Bob Lazar interview, and we played that in the first podcast. So go back and listen to the first podcast, and that will put everything in context. That was the original Bob Lazar, May 15th.
May 15th,
is my day right?
1989.
May 15th, 1989, so a little more than 30 years ago, when he came on air disguised as Dennis and told about this 9 spacecraft that he had seen that he believed were of alien origin, certainly nothing that he'd ever seen or we'd ever had, and I'm going to be interested in hearing what Stoldal, because I know Bob is not as well as you do, but I've known him for years as well, and what his reaction was to that. But this interview, so this is one you've done. It's more recent with him.
Just a couple of weeks ago. Matt and I went over to see Bob, and we went through the whole story of his interest in Area 51, how it began, some trouble that he and Ned Day got into before I was even here, which is, dawn of time stuff, and how this evolved, how our coverage of Area 51, Bob Lazar, S4, that whole story, how it evolved, what hoops we had to jump through before we ever put it on the air.
So this traces all back to the beginning, if you will, of when all this started. So let's go. Here's Bob Stoldal, news director at Channel 8 at the time, certainly, and now retired, but just his work and everything he's done. So let's go ahead and listen to this interview. George interviewing Bob Stoldal.
So your interest in Area 51 started how far back?
Area 51, I was thinking about this when you called, but the interest was in the Nevada test site. It wasn't in Area 51. As far as I knew at that point, it was just the Nevada test site. Those were the days in the 70s that the idea of detonating atomic bombs underground at the Nevada test site were passé. I didn't think so. And I felt for a couple of reasons. One, you had thousands of workers at the Nevada test site, and when they detonated an underground explosion, that was a significant event for them. So I wanted it to be reported, not buried on page 16 in the newspaper or in the third or fourth section in our newscast. So I kept pushing those up into the first section. And we did a lot of reporting on the Nevada test site.
Passé, you mean in that it's not as spectacular as above ground?
Not only that, it was it would be the 112th announced atomic detonation went off this afternoon at 3 o'clock, and that would be the news release from, at that point, the Atomic Energy Commission, or ERDA, or the Department of Energy. And so the media, we just sort of got used to those things, and what, another underground test? Well, it was an atomic bomb. I mean, there was a detonation of an atomic bomb 65 or 80 miles from Las Vegas, plus there were thousands of workers out there that were involved in that and had some interest in that, and therefore I felt it was news. So Channel 8 became the story for the Nevada test site. And in some ways we became the story for what was going on in the desert around the Nevada test site. And there would be the occasional plane crash. And so we would report that. And then after a while, as my little file started to fill up, I started to see some different names that were being used by the different agencies, the Air Force or in this case, actually, the releases were not coming out of the Nevada test site. They were coming out from different agencies. Sometimes they would come out of Nellis Air Force Base regarding a plane crash. That was not a plane from Nellis Air Force Base. And so there just kept being little bits of pieces of information that started to add up that something else was going on. And then I got a hold of a magazine and started subscribing to it called Aviation Week in Space Technology, which I later learned was called within the trades Aviation Leak in Space Technology. And there were stories from the different companies that were building airplanes and other elements of aeronautic elements. And you would find these little one-line pieces of information that connected to Nevada. And then I started to have a file on U-2s, and SR-71 specific planes that were at different times. This is for weather reconnaissance, and then occasionally it was just reconnaissance.
And in those stories, were there references to Nevada? Or you had a suspicion that they were linked?
Sometimes there would be one line, but more often than not, it was about the aircraft and some new development within the aircraft that was tested in Nevada. Not a lot of detail, but every now and then there would be one more piece of information. So as we were reporting these stories, we had all these little bits and pieces of information that we could add to the story that made it a local story. And then I found Gary Francis Powers and his book. And in that, he goes into detail about what took place at a place called Watertown or the ranch. So now we had a location, and then I found a brochure, a booklet that was produced for the visit of John Kennedy when he came here in the very early 60s. And on the back of that was a map of the Nevada test site, plus a little square in the northwest corner that said Area 51. So now we had a map, we had the names, and we could put these, including when there was a story about a new development of an aircraft or something, we could address that and have a map and have stock footage of the of a U-2 and so forth. So it became our story at Channel 8.
Was it anybody else covering it?
No, it wasn't. It was. I mean, if there was a plane crash, certainly the other media, but it would be, well, normally we wouldn't have access to the site because it would be out in the middle of central Nevada where the plane went down. So with no video, there gets that much coverage. On the other hand, we had some other stuff that we could add to the story that gave it a little bit of energy, that gave it a little bit of life.
Context, yeah.
Yeah.
So I remember when I was there in my first year or so working there, you had a little file, an Area 51 file.
Right.
And it wasn't very thick.
Nope.
There wasn't a whole lot of it.
Nope, there was that file, but then there was also a secondary file that I kept of the articles that I had clipped out of the magazines or the newspapers. As a matter of fact, at one point during this process, we had a visit at Channel 8 by a guy that identified himself as being from Naval Intelligence, and he wanted to talk to me. And of course, I said yes. Came back to my office, and point blank, I asked for his identification. He showed me his identification. I had his business card, identified who he was, and he said, "What are you doing all these stories for? What's the source of your information?" I said, "Well, normally I don't do this, but I'm going to tell you the source of my information." And I opened the file cabinet behind me and pulled out our file, which was all newspaper clippings, magazine clippings, highlighted and little Post-it notes on it. I said, here's the file.
And Francis Gary Powers' book.
And his book. And he looked at it and he sort of smiled, and we had a brief conversation. He wasn't in uniform. He was just business suit. And that was the end of that, and left. And in the back of my mind, I said, "Oh, I've got something. I have got something great. I have this business card that says Naval Intelligence." On the back of my office, it was gone.
Well, that's significance of that the fact that who he worked for, it becomes important later, many years later.
Well, I mean, a lot of the bits and pieces, we're also dealing with organized crime and the mob at the same time. So we were dealing with lots of stories at that time. The Nevada test site, Area 51, organized crime was where we were putting a lot of our energy in. And so in some ways these were silos. So you get a visit from Naval Intelligence. Okay, well, we're going to get a visit from organized crime figure the next day. And so but I thought it was interesting. I tried to figure out when did he take his business card back, and I narrowed it down to the fact is when I turned around to my file cabinet, went through and pulled that out, he must have taken his card and put it back in his pocket. He wasn't there then. You know, there's no we didn't have cameras at the TV station, but it was a visit. Nice guy.
Does that pique your interest, though? Holy cow! This guy just came here to ask me how I'm getting information about Area 51.
It does, but I have to say at that moment, somebody else would come in with another story and you would focus on that. It was during that whole period of time, we had Hilton Hotel fires, MGM fires, organized crime, Sinatra getting a gaming license. There were just lots of important news that was going on in our community that when there would be something going on that would pop in the news, we would have the file and the backup to be able to develop that story, and the story kept developing. It was just waiting for somebody to be hired at Channel 8 that would take over that beat full time.
Looking back, so it wasn't until many years later, after you and I had done the stories about Lazar in Area 51, that I realized that there had been a release about the creation of a facility there.
Right.
That in 1955, they sent out a release to the RJ, the Sun, and Channel 8, and maybe a couple of radio stations. Yeah, we're going to build this facility out there. It's a weather monitoring station. Not going to be there very long, just a temporary deal. But I guess they wanted to cover their bases,
Well, the Nevada test site had then been open for about 4 years. It was becoming a little bit more public in a sense. Atmospheric tests were being shown live on television. Walter Cronkite was out here, and it was even when you look back at some of the news releases put out by the Atomic Energy Commission, there is interesting the amount of information they were releasing at that point. And so it doesn't surprise me. I'm not sure that at that point, maybe in 1955, when that release came out, maybe in fact that was going to be a weather station, and the developments, what took place in a very short period of time. Although Gary Francis Powers is about that same time, if I'm not.
Yeah, they picked that location because of the dry lake bed and a landing strip of what it could become for U2.
Yeah.
That's what they had said. Fast forwarding a little bit, Ned Day's working at the station.
Right.
Well, I'm not sure if he did this story before he came to Channel 8 or during the same time. He was at both the paper and Channel 8 or not, but he wrote a story about the stealth fighter. And I don't know what your involvement with that was, but basically you guys broke that story about the stealth fighter, what we now know as the F-117, a plane that was invisible to radar being tested out there in the Nevada desert.
I can tell you that was Ned's story. Background, our little file on other things that were going on helped flesh out the story for Ned, but that was 98% Ned's story. And I remember where he told me that he had it, and it was at a social function, and that we may get a visit, that I may get a visit from somebody asking to hold the story. And so that's why he was alerting me that he'd been working on this. It wasn't, I don't know Ned's source on that. It wasn't important. He had, and sitting down with him the next day or probably 2 days later, he had the details. And nobody in town had heard this before. I didn't know what he was talking about to some degree exactly, so he went over it. And it was a big story. I mean, we went with it. It was at Channel 8. But then we moved on to other stuff. I mean, that's the nature of the beast that was in Las Vegas at those times. And that was a slight aberration focus-wise for Ned, who was more involved in organized crime and other community exposés. The military stealth bombers, or the Interceptor, I think it was. That was a little off his normal beat, but he had it. He had it nailed.
And it went national.
Yeah.
I think the story he told me was that he got picked up by the FBI, that he got hauled in and in a scene right out of a movie, put under a bright spotlight, and they were peppering him with questions about where he got this information. I don't know if you remember this or not, but he says there, don't you know that you've put the lives of 200 million Americans in danger by revealing this? Now the Russians know about this stuff. And he was kind of sweating it. And eventually it occurred to him a lesson from a journalism class regarding the Bay of Pigs,
right.
And an example of the Bay of Pigs.
Yes.
And he says to the FBI, look, if you thought you had a secret, I did you a favor. Because if me, a little reporter based in Las Vegas, if I can get it, then certainly the Russians can get it.
all those words that you just refreshed, those were part of a conversation that we had. Now, as far as him under the spotlight of the of the FBI, I don't.
Maybe that was hyperbole.
I would say that based on the conversation that I had with Ned, he had a conversation with somebody in law enforcement, and that I was going to get a call asking to hold the story. So
did you?
No, we went with it. I mean, we didn't go with it right away. I needed to understand a little bit more of the story, and we did a little bit more checking. And it turns out there's a lot of information out there. You just need to go like Aviation Week and Space Technology. That was just filled with information all the time that I thought would be secret or top secret or classified. And so he was able to produce some material that wasn't specifically saying that this occurred, but boy, did it box in the story.
So you guys would pull at different threads, stuff that's out there, but needed to be collated.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Plus, Ned also had some solid sources. I mean, some sources that trusted him on two levels. One was that he wouldn't reveal the source.
Well, one of his sources has come forward and admitted being a source, and Ned acknowledged it. It was John Lear.
Okay.
John Lear was part of this group that would go out at Tonopah and in Lincoln County and around Groom Lake, and with binoculars and cameras and lenses, and look for whatever it was that was flying around. And I know that some information came from Lear. Do you remember that?
John said that.
John has said it publicly. Yeah.
Okay. I didn't ask Ned who his source was. He just said, this is where. Now, I have to tell you, I didn't know John Lear per se. I knew the Lear name, and somehow that was enough credibility or added credibility to what John was saying. But Lear was helpful in that story.
Yeah. Well, he flew for the CIA. Okay. He knew all kinds of people in aviation and aerospace, and he had good sources himself. And he spent a lot of time out there, sitting in the desert, looking for it.
Well, and he also knew what to read, where the sources of information was, and then how to interpret. I mean, he and I could read the same article and clearly get different perspectives out of different information out of that same article, and it was the same thing with organized crime. We could all read a piece of information, an injunction, or a writ of some sort, and an attorney would see one thing, and a journalist may see another thing, and so it's that knowledge, that expertise that he brought to the table that helped.
Did you ever go out to Groom Lake yourself? Did you ever send a team out there and see if you can get close to it, see if you can get some pictures? Do you remember?
No, not until you came on board.
Well, in the mid 80s, the U.S. Air Force seized 89,000 acres of land around Groom Lake. They took it. One day it's public land. The next day there's guys there with rifles and machine guns and guarding it, and it's no longer public. And then it went to Congress, and they asked for permission to do what they'd already done. There was some coverage then.
Let me backtrack. The answer is yes, but to say that we went to Groom Lake, we went up as far as Tonopah, and felt that we were on the edge when we would get to some of the sort of barbed wire fence that said top secret, don't go in here, or danger, those kinds of things. We'd photograph that.
And you wouldn't cross the line, though.
No.
Yeah.
No. But to say that we went all the way around to the northern tip of Area 51 and tried to come down, we didn't do that. But I'm thinking that we also went up Pahranagat, the road Alamo and Hyco in that area.
Yeah. So, you know, it's, if you have a base that's secret, but you know it's there,
Right.
that you're going to get curious about that.
Right.
And, you know, for a while, years later, we go back through DOE and AEC files, you have maps of the test site, and there's Area 51, and it says 51 in that box.
Right.
And then in the 70s, it disappeared. It's gone. You know, you're naturally going to be curious about that.
You're curious about the Nevada test site from the very beginning, 1951, because it's where they're detonating atomic bombs and mushroom cloud in the end of World War II and the Cold War. And so you're looking through your news coverage through that sort of perspective. And so you're curious. And then as journalists, you're always curious about something that's secret. First, why is it secret? And then as you're peeling back, why is it secret? You start finding other bits and pieces. But Area 51, I'm trying to think when. It was a long while before we actually used the designation Area 51. We were referring to whatever was in the reference material that we were using, whether it was Watertown, as I say, or the ranch. But there was a point, we knew about it before the map. And then we realized the map had come out in 1961, I think, when Kennedy was here. And we're talking about it a decade later that we have just discovered the map that was already a decade old. But other maps of the Nevada test site didn't include.
Did you ever get a hint, because of that map and where you first saw it, that Kennedy visited Area 51? Did you ever have that suspicion during that trip?
No, the thing that sticks in my mind is his atomic faux pas. And up until that point, when the Atomic Energy Commission would announce they're going to have a Nevada test site, it would be the 147th announced test. And so when he arrived, there were X number of announced tests. When he left, he accidentally said, added an additional 200 or a significant number and so they had to scramble because some of the smaller tests and some other tests were not announced, but he announced all of them. And so that was, but as far as whether or not he would have gone all the way north to that northeast corner.
They had a helicopter on that trip out there. Ralph Lamb was with them. They had a helicopter and they were gone for like an hour and a half.
61. I think I don't know. I think he may have been intrigued with going out there, but he was, I think, was interested in the NERVA or rover program, with space flight with reactors. So, I think that's where my stepfather worked on the rover project. And so, in addition to all the reasons for covering the Nevada test site, my dad worked out there, and although never gave me one slight, I wouldn't even bring the conversation up because he would.
You tried. Did you try at some point? Or you got a signal, no, don't ask about this?
I never asked him. I mean.
And he never volunteered?
No, it just was, no.
Could you gain access to the test site? Could you send reporters to the test site in those days? I guess the above ground tests, they had journalists out there.
Right.
The underground tests, did you have access to it at those days?
On an irregular basis, but they would invite, I think I was out there maybe 4 times for underground tests, and they would draw national media in as well. You drive to Mercury, and then you'd be escorted to the control center, which is just right over the hill, which, by the way, we're trying to save as a historic monument.
I remember in the early 80s, 81, when I was first there, if there was a nuke test, they'd have a handout. They'd give you a little video of the ground shaking and stuff, and we did every one of them. Every one of them made it on the newscast.
Everyone. It was, and one of my favorite things was finding some audio of the caverns were caving in of the test site of the sound that was down there, and matching that up with the video of an explosion. But yeah, it was, and occasionally there would be a mistake. They dropped one, and we filed Freedom of Information on. They were lowering it down, and it came off the cable, and the nuke device went to the ground and stood there for years. They couldn't figure out what to do with it, whether to drill in or whatever.
1987, John Lear comes into my life. He had, in '86, he'd come to see Ned, and he brought him a pile of UFO documents. Comes into the newsroom, plops them down on Ned's desk.
Right.
He says, Ned, you need to see this. We've worked on other stuff before. You need to see this. It's your next big story. It's UFOs. It's the biggest cover-up in history. You need to read this stuff, and then we can talk about it. And Ned looked through some of this stuff and says, look, this can't be true. If this was true, I'd already know about it. And so he didn't want nothing to do with it. And I overheard it. And I said, let me take a look at that stuff. And read through it. I thought, well, that's pretty interesting. And I had Lear come on the record, a little show called On the Record that aired on the weekends, early in the morning. City council people, county commissioners,
Frank
nobody
Rosenthal.
watched. Yeah. Well, and when I was doing it, I didn't have as interesting a guest as that. And I put Lear on, and suddenly there's all kinds of people calling, and hey, who was that guy? What's the deal on that UFO stuff? We had him on again, a bigger response, had him on a third time in 1988, and that's when he hinted that he knew a guy who's about to get hired out at Groom Lake at a facility in the desert, and they're working on flying saucers. And
all of that going all the way back to the first time Lear came in with the box of UFO material. Ned was as bright as they come, but the scientific side was not where his interest was, and also he was just immersed in organized crime. I mean, and that was 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. But fortunately, we had somebody that saw the value in it as well, and so Ned came, and there was some discussion regarding you, and then we had the Lear interviews on, and again, and the interest, the phone calls. And let me put the business hat on. This was good for rating. This was a solid story that people had an interest in, that nobody was covering in the so-called mainstream media. And we did it. I remember all the times we did it. We did it with a sort of a John Desai. You know, we had question marks ourselves about this. At the same time, we were still putting the information that was out there. And it was an important part of the development around the world, what started the Channel 8.
May 15th, 1989, almost 30 years ago, we have an opening on the 5 o'clock news, our 5-minute interview segment. Our interview bails on us.
Right.
So I reached out to John Lear and said, hey, at a moment's notice, do you think your UFO friend that you told me about would come over and do this interview? Well, he's not going to show his identity. Well, we'll black him out. We go on the air, we send a truck up to Lear's house.
Right.
The skinny, bespectacled guy gets in the vehicle. He does an interview under the pseudonym Dennis, and he tells the story about
Dennis.
S4, saucers, 9 saucers in hangars out there at just south of Groom Lake. Do you remember watching that on the air?
I remember watching Dennis on the air, and I remember a couple of things. First of all, the capability to do that was relatively new, the capability with a microwave and for us. And the ability to turn that around that fast and get that up and to do that. I think, seemed to me that we had a couple hours that wasn't like last minute, but it was a couple hours. And I do remember having to myself, okay, where are we going with this? Because we were on the edge. I mean, we were on the edge of almost tabloidish TV, almost alien frogs are raping our women kind of a thing. But we weren't. It sounded credible. It wasn't too crazy, but it was still. So yeah, I do. I remember that. I don't remember exactly what he was saying, but I remember Dennis and are we going to do? So a lot of questions went through my mind.
I remember, we didn't know where that interview was going to go. We just knew this guy had been with Lear. Lear had some credibility with us, and so he had this incredible story of working out there in the desert on this strange technology. So we asked him, well, how do you know it's alien? Or why couldn't we build it? And then he kept going on, and it sounded like he wasn't making it up.
No, but I do remember saying, George, I need to meet this guy in person.
Was it Lem Lewis who was the general manager at that time? Because I remember somebody, whoever the GM was, come back to you and, is this for real? After that was on the air.
There was, to say there were misgivings, I'm not sure I would put them all in 72 font size, but there were some, because we were, Channel 8 was the credible news when we covered stories that other stations, other media wouldn't, the gaming board and the city commission and the county commission. We were a serious journalistic outfit. And here we are with a live, uncensored interview with somebody saying they're alien spacecraft. Oh, where are we going with this?
The phone starts ringing.
The phone's, general manager comes running down with not, are you crazy, but help me understand what we're doing. And I didn't really have too much. I said, well, George is doing it. So if it's a real problem, it's George is doing it.
Well, then a couple days later, you and I go up to Lear's house to meet him.
Yeah.
To meet Lazar and put him through his paces. Meet this guy. We don't even know what his name is.
No, and he seemed more credible on the air than that first time I met him in person. He just seemed sort of shy, and it was hard to pull information out. Now, clearly he and Lear knew each other better than I knew him for my first meeting, or you knew him maybe with a couple of meetings. Skinny guy, and I didn't leave there totally reassured.
I remember a couple of things that may jog your memory. Lear wanted to control the whole process, so he wanted us to ask questions through him, and he repeats them to Bob Lazar. We didn't know the name. He just says, I'm not going to give you the name. But when we walked into Lear's house, there's a guest register at the front desk, at the front door, and Lazar had signed his name that day. So there's his name. We walk in, and then Lear says he's not going to tell us his name until later, when he determines whether we're worthy or not.
No, you told me that.
Yeah.
I didn't see the registrar. You saw the registrar. Yeah. And I'm not sure you tell me that until afterwards, like going out the door.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So you were not sure. I mean, we asked him a bunch of questions about his background, and when we came out, you didn't feel all that good about it. Or
well, it wasn't so much his answers. It wasn't how it was. I just wanted to get my knowledge of UFOs, of any of extraterrestrial elements, sort of that much. So it wasn't so much the questions that I was interested in, his answers. I want to see how he answered, how confident he was, and how articulate he could deal with the topic. And I think he was nervous. I think he was just concerned. Later meetings, he clearly was a brighter human being than the first time I met him. He just really was knowledgeable. Interesting character, eccentric, eclectic, any other E word you want to put in front of that. He was that. And I also remember him, he could go off topic relatively easy, just seeing that he had lots of interest other than that particular topic.
We walked out of that meeting and had a conversation as we're walking away, and I remember us just talking about the possibility, what if this is true? I mean, what if it's true?
Well, I know we had that conversation. We had that conversation any number of times. Because we kept going back to that basic, what if this is, no, is this true? We still had, and so that's different than what if it's true. The question is this true? A couple of meetings with him, some pieces of information, some specific aspects. I think the first thing we did was we wanted to get some documentation on who this guy was, who Dennis was. Who he really was. We needed to know whether or not he worked at Area 51, other than just his word. We didn't have much of anything other than what he said. And Lear, of course, was supporting that.
We also had an early conversation about, well, look, if we can substantiate this, or any part of it, I mean, the implications are huge. We could make a multi-part series out of it. These could be, you said, these could be 5 minutes long a night. At one point.
Well, I think that was a little bit later on, a little bit later on down the line, when, first of all, there was a lot of interest in the interview, a lot of public interest. What media interest there was sort of these guys what is Channel 8 doing? What's all that about? And there was limited. I think the other stations in town were laughing at us. We continued to do the story. We continued to add bits and pieces of facts, and so there was. No, that doesn't fit. This fits. This is a piece of information. This is the date. It matches the date that he said that this. So all of a sudden, we now have a stack of stuff that is factually backed up. Some limited confirmation that he worked at Area 51. Just the fact that we even had limited information that he worked at Area 51 was good enough for me, because to get any information, anybody worked at Area 51, turns out there was a phone book, but there was no phone book that here's the employees at Area 51 and here's what they do. But there was bits and pieces that were enough. And occasionally we'd run into, when I say we, I'm really referring to you, we'd run into a roadblock to where that didn't quite check out. And so there were still questions, but then there was this whole body of evidence, of documentation, of interest that the federal government had done over the years, and all with lingering questions. Operation Blue Book, how redacted was that to begin with?
So from May to November, we got an interview with him on camera, that showed his face.
Right.
He agreed to do that because he wanted to save his life. He was afraid that they were going to wipe him out, that something might happen to him. So that was insurance. He agreed to do that. We were not allowed to broadcast it. You can have it, but don't air it. And for 7.5 months, we worked on filling in the blanks and also learning the much bigger picture about UFOs. Read everything.
Right.
Every government document, we read every book we could get our hands on. The idea being, look, we can't go out in the desert and find UFOs, but we can follow the paper trail and do what journalists do. Try to verify what we can about him, about the bigger picture. Is there really a cover-up? Have they been lying to us? And it turned out, yes.
Well, there was exactly what took place. We went out and we had a good start, in the sense that we already had Area 51. We already had that little file. We already had U2, and we already knew that factually the place existed. And so then that was library work, was going out, and every now and then you'd find a piece of information that we could add over here, and the jigsaw puzzle would start to take place. That's something, start to take shape, that something, in fact, was going on at the test site. A lot of big pieces to the puzzle were missing. But this piece, even though it's missing, well, I can see the other pieces around that, what that could be. And I remember him saying, backtracking to what you said, he did the interview with you was protection. And I say, what, we agreed not to put it on the air? Were you crazy? Why did we agree to that? And you know, there were any number of conversations that dead ends, things, avenues that opened up.
The first time he drew the craft for you, remember that?
I wanted him to now, I know you had plenty of questions, and so and you went and found some answers, but I still, it was still gnawing at me. Come on, I need to have some piece of, I'm bought in, folks, but show me something that, and so it was basically an almond-shaped shaped thing with some additional detail. He was hesitant to do it, but he did. And the fact that he went ahead and did that, even though it didn't show me the inner workings, and there wasn't some big-eyed, bug-eyed aliens that he was drawing, it was enough, and it was scientific enough in my limited scope that it added to the credibility.
He agreed to polygraph tests, more than one.
Right.
He took us to Los Alamos, which denied that he was there. We found him in a phone book. We got an ID number for him. There was a newspaper article on the front page of the Los Alamos paper that says he's a physicist at Los Alamos, and it showed him with his rocket car. And the premise being, if he was allowed to work at classified stuff in a technical or scientific position at Los Alamos, it's at least conceivable he could work out there in the Nevada desert.
Right. Those are the things that kept our engine moving forward. Okay, so that fits in. Again, this is a giant puzzle, but the pieces kept falling into place. One more fact goes there, this goes there, and the story starts having corners and developing. Now each one of those little things we can drill down on. The Los Alamos story, the jet car story. I mean, all the other things that he had an interest in, and some challenging things that he was involved with, where he was accounting for a lady of the night. The fact is, we reported all that stuff. I will have to say that all through this, both of us, I think, I'm sure, our credibility was important in this, and we needed to make sure that as we delved into UFOs, we maintained our credibility.
Well, we knew it was a risk.
Yeah.
It's a risk if you don't do it right.
Right, and I think I'm looking in the mirror and telling myself I think we did it right. I think for the most part we were able to do it correctly and quite frankly gave credibility to the whole UFO subject matter. That here's a journalist that is using standard traditional journalistic techniques to get to the bottom of the story, and here's what he has found. Then taking that and looking back at other stories that have come up through the UFO circle, but they were done by not less than credible, but by people that were not in sort of the mainstream media. So there were other pieces, and so our puzzle, people had worked on these stories for years or decades. that information came our way, and we were able to plug that into our piece.
November rolls around.
Right.
We want to go forward with the story.
Right.
We talk Lazar into sitting down and giving us another interview,
Okay.
more detailed, that we can incorporate into a series. And the series isn't a week-long series; it's a 2-week series.
Well, you think
Because we collected so much by then.
The series that it was, there was a lot of material, and we had been broadcasting at Channel 8 these bits and pieces at different times. And there was really a need to give some continuity to it, to give some A to B to C, some chronology, some
Put it in context.
And so we decided that we would do a series. But in order to do this, we also needed to break some boundaries, and that was a traditional multi-part series would run about 2.5, 3.5 minutes each night. That was the standard advice that news consultants, and was used around the country, not much longer than 2, 3, maybe 4 minutes. Well, our decision was to break that mold, and the stories that you wrote and produced, that we broadcast, were 6 minutes or 7 minutes or 9 minutes or 12 or 14 minutes. And what occurred was the community in Las Vegas wanted to hear the story, they wanted to see the story, and they tuned in night after night after night after night, whether it was 6 minutes or 14 minutes. And so by Thursday of that week, I think I asked you if you had any more, and you said there's a lot more. So I think that story went on. We may have lost a bit of the chronology that we had in the first 5 parts, but there were big hunks of the story that would stand alone, and that's what occurred the next week. And I think the stories of the following week, because of the you had to say, bring the audience along, and you couldn't just do that with a one-liner. It had to be a paragraph or two. It had to be, oh, now I get it. Okay. And so the audience just liked that type of journalism. They wanted information on the topic. And so those stories ran 10, 12 minutes for the rest of the weekend, and there wasn't any drop-off in the viewer's interest.
Yeah, there was a buzz.
Yeah.
Town was buzzing.
Yeah. That we could transition to when you came down to Nashville to take a look at that topic in the South, and we did a multi-part series that week, and it was also the same interest in the community. Within a couple of months, the other television stations in town decided that the UFO topic was not taboo to them, and they ventured into that. But it's for me the interest of the viewers in Las Vegas, and I'm assuming it was just based on other surveys that have been people around the world in the topic. That in itself is worthy of another 5-part series to understand that need and interest. And as we move forward, you understand that my generation watched Flash Gordon talking to his watch, or Dick Tracy talking to his watch, and now we do that. The same thing was going on with the UFOs, rather than this mythology, tabloidism. A real journalist is looking at this topic, and I'm comfortable now. This is good information.
You know, that first series was a success for us as a TV station, viewership, and then the 2-hour special was a success.
Right.
We did a follow-up series in February of 1990,
Okay.
also a success.
Yes.
Got nothing but grief from our media brethren, our colleagues in Las Vegas and elsewhere, but public couldn't get enough of it, and it started a stampede to Area 51 by the world's media, Buses went out there, tourists went out there, aviation buffs out there. It's never stopped. And here, 30 years later, it's in movies and books and television shows and on T-shirts and ashtrays. The Little Alien, the Rachel Bar and Grill becomes the Little Alien. The extraterrestrial highway is dedicated by the state of Nevada. The Las Vegas 51's baseball team. We just came from a sandwich shop, Matt and I, where they were serving the Area 51 sandwich. We should have had a piece of all that, Bob.
Well, this is a worldwide phenomenon, and I can't think of another. You have other places around the world that are interesting: Great Wall of China, the Eiffel Tower, the Notre Dame, different places. This is a patch of land out in the middle of the Nevada desert, in the central Nevada desert. But it goes back not to that spot, but people want to get close to this topic. They want to get it, they want to feel UFOs. They want to feel what is as much as they can touch, and to be there, and maybe they'll see something as the heart of UFOs. It doesn't surprise me. In some sense, the entertainment industry, whether it's Independence Day or the History Channel, would get into these topics. But it's more the public's interest. More of the public just can't seem to get enough of it. And what they're looking for is facts. As much as there's enough mythology in UFO land. And so Area 51 is a fact.
Well, for the next 20 years, mainstream media tend to dismiss it still and make fun of it and not give it fair coverage. December of 2017, the New York Times covers it. Right. Holy cow, there really has been secret UFO studies. The Pentagon has been digging into this stuff. There are now there are indications that there really are materials from somewhere else stashed in hangars somewhere that are being analyzed. And it feels like we're on the cusp of a new understanding of this, but suddenly it's respectable 30 years later to report on it and discuss it.
Well, as I meant, the idea that we approach this topic with traditional journalistic guidelines of double checking, of two sources, of making sure that we had the best evidence. It has taken a while, but it started at Channel 8, and now it has moved to the New York Times, to say 30 years later. But it traveled around the world well before the New York Times.
It's amazing how far it went and how well that story is known and its place in cultural history. And people in Africa and Australia and Europe and South America know about Area 51.
Yeah. Somebody wants to give me a credit card rate. Also, my student loan, I can get a free student loan.
Yeah, just amazing how big it became.
Thank you. I think when that first five-part series, the first five-part series you did, we were getting enough solid local reaction to continue with this story, but also it was a fact that there were still a lot of unanswered questions that were bugging us that we needed to answer. So we had those two things that were going. And then when the five-part series, the reaction to that.
Nine-part.
The 9 parts, multi-minute. I still had questions about this topic, because as we do the research in it, you find so much garbage, so much National Enquirer crap that's out there. But I will tell you, even amongst some of the garbage reporting, there would be one little piece of information that there may have been a nugget, there may have been something in there that you could add to this or that.
Well, yeah, it's daunting to separate wheat from chaff in this field.
Yeah.
It draws profiteers and crazy people and people with wild imaginations like nothing else.
Well, and it's also, I think though that there were already people within the UFO research industry, cottage industry, that were credible, but they just couldn't. They couldn't be heard. They didn't have the resources, and so when we came along, it helped them with their stories. And I'm sure that you were approached a number of times and met any number of these people that had been trying to sell this story, that weren't the crazies, that weren't the profiteers. They were regular human beings that have been doing a lot of work and were solid people, but just as much as they waved their hands, they couldn't be heard. And I think that you gave voice to those people. You may not have interviewed them, but the fact is, when somebody else would look at their research, they say, "Oh well, maybe." No.
Here's another factor that I think can't be ignored. You hate to mention it, but it was fun. That stuff's fun. For work, it's not really work. It was fun digging into that.
Well, I don't want to say covering organized crime was fun, but if we include in the word fun, exciting, and fulfilling, I mean, covering organized crime, covering UFOs, fun would be a word, but we need a bigger word than that.
Yeah.
It was fulfilling in a lot of ways, that we're covering ground that should be covered and nobody else is covering. As a matter of fact, people laugh at this organized crime. Oh no, that's real serious. And kudos for covering organized crime. Well, you guys are really tough on that. But UFOs, in some ways, took more courage to cover that because a lot of the media would laugh at you. Fun, yeah, but it was exciting, fulfilling. You look back and you say that was time well spent. Now there may be some other things that may have not been well spent, but time doing that was well spent.
Okay, so there we go. Bob Stoldal. Good chance to hear that voice again. Love the voice. You also mentioned Ned Day in there at the start of that, certainly, and I know where Ned fits in this whole thing too is phenomenal in the work that he did. We mainly think of him as the great mob reporter here in this city, and then also a great friend of yours, and also somebody who I didn't know Ned had a big interest as well in Area 51 and those sort of things.
Well, sort of accidental. His interest was in secrets, and somebody came along, John Lear, as we've heard, with a secret about a plane that was flying around out there in the Nevada desert that was essentially invisible to radar. Ned had broken that story. I remember I used to teach a journalism class at UNLV, and Ned would come once a year and lecture to it, and he would always tell the story about how he got picked up by the FBI after he broke the story of the F-117. He didn't know it was called that. He just knew it was a stealth plane of some sort. The FBI picks him up off the street, takes him into a dark room, puts bright lights in his face, start lecturing him, pointing their fingers at him, saying, don't you know what you've done? You endangered the security of 220 million Americans by revealing this secret. Now the Russians know about this, and Ned's kind of sweating bullets for a while, and then he realized something he remembered from his journalism classes about a similar case where the New York Times sat on a story about the Bay of Pigs. They thought they were doing the government a big favor. Turns out the Cubans had found out that the Bay of Pigs invasion was about to happen. They slaughtered the people and came on the beaches. Secrecy on the part of the press In that case, self-censorship didn't work. So that's what he told the FBI when they had pulled him in about the F-117 story. He said, look, I'm a street scuffler in Las Vegas. I work for a little newspaper in North Las Vegas and for Channel 8. And if I can find out this secret, then you didn't have a secret. And if I can find it out, the Russians can find it out. So I did you a favor. And they let him go. And that was Ned. Ned and Bob were great friends. They were also competitors. It was a great time to be a newsman in Las Vegas and a journalist in Las Vegas. And they were really great examples for all of us. They set a very high bar. On this story, Ned getting an interest in the plane that was out there through his association with John Lear, getting to meet Lear. Of course, Bob wanted to one-up that, so he got his own information about Area 51. And I think we're going to hear a story later about a visit he had from the Office of Naval Intelligence, which that becomes interesting later when we learn the story of Bob Lazar. Because Lazar said he worked for Naval Intelligence out there at Area 51. You're wondering, what's the Navy doing in the desert? But that was the story he told. You know, we put these reports out, news reports these days, about UFOs, Area 51, government secrets, wild stuff, cattle mutilations. And because of the advent of citizen journalism, the idea that anybody who has a keyboard is a journalist, everybody has a podcast, everybody has their own website. Everybody thinks they're Woodward and Bernstein, and they equate what we do on the air with what appears on computer screens, and it's not the same. I applaud citizen journalism. I'm glad there are people out there that want to have a voice in things, but the standards of what we do are different from what is done for people who want to express their opinions online. And the stories that we put on the air here, under a micromanager and an editor like Bob Stoldal, we went through them. You know, it wasn't easy to get that stuff on the air, with the exception of that first Dennis interview, in which case Bob goes, what the hell was that, you know? Which, of course, you know, was a live interview. We didn't know what he was going to say. We didn't have a chance to vet him. But part 2 of the interview with Bob is going to be the process that we went through after that. The months that we spent working on what became UFOs, the Best Evidence, and the difficulties we ran into in trying to verify parts of Bob Lazar's background.
And there's also a part 2 of UFOs, the Best Evidence, with a question mark in it, that was done in February of 1990. That's coming up on the website, by the way. So I'll make the point now. If you've enjoyed part 1 and have seen the 8 parts of that, and I enjoyed putting it together, I'll say this, and I enjoyed watching it when I worked at a TV station across the street and saw it and knew of its impact and would hear people talk about what effect it was having on the ratings. That was one of the things they were concerned about. But I was looking at the material going, wow, hold on a second now. What? And I remember talking, again, when I worked for the competition at the time as a sports guy there, and there was nobody at our station that could have ever done something like that, and nobody, I will say, in the journalistic world that can do what you've been able to do. But part of that was you having free, I don't want to say free reign, because that's not the way it wasn't free reign, but at least you had people like Bob Stoldal who trusted you to be journalistically sound with these stories and to approach them from that point of view. That doesn't always happen in newsrooms. Oh, no, that doesn't always happen, as we all know. Doesn't always happen.
Yeah, it's amazing. It started with Bob, and it's continued to the present day that they've trusted Matt and I to do the right thing, to do our jobs and be careful with what we put on the air. So we weigh it, we evaluate it, we try to get verification and confirmation, and if we can't, then we don't put it on. We'll characterize it as such. So I don't think we're going to have the days of 15-minute news stories anymore. That era has probably gone. So the freedom we had back then is something that's, I don't think, is going to happen again. It's a different world. But we still have a great deal of freedom to pursue stories that interest us, and that doesn't happen in every newsroom around the city or around the country.
And now we have Mystery Wire for 15-minute stories.
That's true. We can put them there. Yeah.
They live there.
Yeah.
And the February, so anticipating that's going to be coming out in February of next year. That will be the 30-year anniversary of your second series that was done on this, and looking forward to I've seen the stories, so I know what they are, and looking forward to seeing those, and I know you will be too, that are listening to this podcast, that you look forward to that. But there's also news stories coming out. This is not, okay, as we look at the past, and that's important, but there's stuff coming out each and every day that we will talk about on this podcast, that we will have on Mystery Wire, that you will have in newscast broadcasts. There's still stuff happening that this seems to be a time, if you will, a zenith in the UFO industry, if you even call it that, but mainly because of what the U.S. military is unleashing.
Yeah, I mean, 30 years ago, 1989, our baptism of fire, that was really exciting for us as journalists. The only thing that's close to that is what's going on now. I never thought I would live to see it in my lifetime. I've been through this ringer many times over the last 3 decades. Disclosure's right around the corner. Yeah, the government's going to spill the secrets. We're finally going to learn what's going on. And it's never really happened. It's never come close. Well, it's coming close now. There's some really interesting stuff that's already been made public, and I can tell you that there's more coming.
Do we know? And I'll ask you a question. The question I asked T.D. Barnes was in here earlier, who was a guy, Area 51, worked out there, CIA. Was the CIA supposed to be involved in Area? Wait a minute. They were part of Area 51, even though they weren't supposed to be back then. They work outside the country, not inside the country. But anyway, interesting point there. But T.D. Barnes, I said, what do you think is going on out at Area 51 today? What are they doing out there? I'll ask you the same question. What do you think? Do you have any guess, any idea? They have to be more secret because people have better technology to try to find. You got Google Maps, you got all sorts of things to be able to try to find out what's going on there. What do you think?
Well, a couple of things. We evaluate foreign technology, and we test our best against their best. How they acquire some of the things they've acquired over the years, that's a story all by itself. A lot of skullduggery, trickery, bribery, all kinds of means. But we generally get their stuff, and then we match it up against ours. I know that a lot of technology has been developed along the lines of drones. I had heard, this is some years ago, about a plane that's invisible. Not invisible to radar, but actually invisible.
Oh.
As well as fighter planes that don't have pilots. You know, it's not just drones that spy on things or drones that can fire missiles, but planes that can actually be combat planes that don't have pilots. And then, I've heard about these insect-sized drones that they've been developing for a while out there. And, all kinds of different monkey business that keep us all safe.
And to what extent, whether it was testing or development, the stealth helicopters used in the Osama bin Laden raid were somehow had a connection to Area 51.
Right. You just heard a story that came out in one national publication about the Night Stalkers. That's a unit that they are the guys, the special ops guys who fly special ops guys on raids like the bin Laden raid, like the ISIS leader raid.
Okay, so like they had Soviet MiGs out there, famously. They had them out there and flew them. They had U.S. pilots flying these Soviet aircraft to see their capabilities. You're saying that sort of stuff still happening out there with however they get them different materials, capabilities of other nations, and test them, tear them apart, fly them, go through them, whatever they have to.
Yeah, and then you'll remember the F-117 supposedly was retired. Matt and I were out there on the day that they closed the hangar doors at Area 52 at Tonopah Test Range. They folded up their wings and put them all in a warehouse. That's it. They're not there anymore. Well, that's not true. They're flying around out there. We've talked to people who've seen them. And the question is, what are they doing? And the expectation is that there's something else has been put on them to see how it reacts to different radars and sensors that we have, whether we can detect it, whether anti-technology measures work against whatever the bad guys have. Fun.
All right. No, it sounds interesting. You're going to learn more stuff here, certainly with the podcast on Mystery Wire. Go to MysteryWire.com to get the latest and the greatest. And like I said, sign up for all the social media stuff so we can keep in touch with you. We'll be putting this podcast on air as well on YouTube. We'll be putting that up and on Facebook and on our page, so you'll be able to hear it and see it as well. So that should be fun, and get to see Bob Stoldal, that interview. So, thanks for listening, everybody. For George Knapp, Matt Adams, I'm Ron Futrell. Anything, Matt?
I'm good.
Closing? Good to go? Okay, thanks for listening, everybody. Bye for now. We will be back next week with another podcast. Thanks for checking out Mystery Wire. Bye for now, everybody.